Di sini bisa sih kalau ada. Ini ngomongnya. Ngomong aja ya langsung pakai.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming, despite the freezing weather. So yeah, very difficult to get up in the morning today. So thank you for coming. So this is today we are having one of our ISG seminar, a regular activity held by the ANU Indonesia project. So before anything else, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to the elders past and present. So this is a hybrid event, and we will be taking questions after the presentation from the floor and from online. So those online can write their questions or comments in the Q&A box, and we will read them out. So we will have 45-minute presentations and followed by the 45 minutes question and answers. Let me just introduce our speaker today. So Dr. Susan Olivia is a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Waikato, New Zealand. Her research interests are in development economics, applied microeconometrics, and machine learning. Much of her research uses large-scale administrative and survey data, as well as geographic data, including satellite data. Susan has a PhD from the University of California, Davis, and is currently a visiting fellow with the ANU Indonesia project. For those who would like to discuss with her on anything, she will be on campus through 22nd of June, so the end of this week. Susan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, Ibu Dayu, for the introduction, and then thank you, ANU Indonesia project, for having me here, and then thanks everybody for coming here in person or in Zoom here. So it is very grateful for us that we get opportunity to share our work in progress. So this is actually a joint work with my colleague John Gibson at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. So I mean, it's even better that we get to present our work in front of this Indonesian expert, and hopefully that we are looking forward to get some comments to make our paper a bit stronger here, right? So let me just try to give you a bit motivation that why we are interested in this topic. Sorry. Okay, so tobacco-related death is actually preventable as death disease. But according to WHO here, that this global health and economic burden of tobacco use is enormous. So about that, almost 9 million of death a year caused by the smoking. And then out of this almost 9 million death is about 200,000. This is actually Indonesia. So even though that if you are not a smoker directly, if you exposed to the second-hand smoke, you are also going to be in danger as well, right? So about 1.3 million of these deaths among people who do not use tobacco, right? So some of the epidemiology paper showing us in here is that if you are a pregnant mother, if you're actually exposed to the second-hand smoke, you tend to give birth to the baby that usually much more the lower weight in here, right? So in addition to this very big burden to the global health issue in here, tobacco use raises direct costs not only for the individuals. What we meant by this in here is that typically the individual who smoke, they tend to have a higher cost related to the tobacco usage in here, or sometimes maybe that because they're exposed to this second health, they might be also causing this in here, right? But it's going to also causing government as well, because that if government had to take care of this tobacco health-related disease in here, so that money probably better used for building infrastructure or improving access to the quality in here, right? So in a way, trade off, what is actually better here. And then in terms for the industry in here is that, like people that tend to like smoke, or maybe if you're exposed to the secondhand smoke, that might cause, if you are being sick, you probably is going to have kind of this absenteeism in the workplace in here, right? So as a result, if you're going to like look at this healthcare cost for tobacco in Indonesia per case in here, it's usually can like amount between 500 million to about 1.2 billion. That is quite a huge amount of money is going to be lost from here. So in addition to this in here is that tobacco use also increases the social and then financial inequality by disproportionately harming the poor. So basically that the poor, they usually tend to have the, the health condition is probably not as great compared to the richer people. And then partly because that the poor, they tend to have, like lack of access, probably, that in world that we don't have a perfect Medicare like Australia and here, right? If they got sick, they probably have to like come out from their out-of-pocket money here to like go to the doctor in here, right? So like some of these people, if they were sick, they probably like cannot go to the work. As a result, that they probably like forgone of that the wage salary that they're going to get here. So as a result, it's going to like increase social and financial equity by disproportionately like harming the poor, right? So as a result, that given this tobacco is quite a bit of public health issue in here, so the WHO recommendation in here is that raising the taxes on tobacco product is the most effective tool for the reducing tobacco use in here. So when you like try to look at this WHO report, most of them kind of like say that if you want to like cure this tobacco-related health problem in here, let's just like try to increase the like tax in here. So the idea in here, because that a lot of these developing country, we tend to use the price as a fiscal policy, hoping that when the price of like particular product in this kind of I call it as seen goods in here is become a much more expensive. Hopefully, we think it's going to like deter people like not to like smoke in here, right? So according to the WHO recommendation, is that your tax should be at least 75% of the like consumer price. I think that some country already like implemented kind of this tax policy here. Australia is probably one of the like country that are very expensive to like buy a pack of cigarette here, right? So I'm going to like show you comparison at what is the price looks like from Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, and Japan. So given this kind of like tobacco topic is quite a bit controversial in here, is that as a result, Indonesia is one of the largest tobacco like purchasing country in here. So it's not surprising here is that quite a bit of considerable interest in estimating the effect of price on cigarette demand in Indonesia. So when we like try to do the literature review in the last 15 years, so at least about like 8 studies that published in the last 15 years in here, right? So basically that when the demand study in Indonesia, they typically are using kind of this household survey data. And then partly because, that if you are from a time series kind of perspective in here, probably the best way to like get the elasticity of demand if you have a time series data here. But the reality in here that when we are working on developing country, we probably do not have a long time series to begin with, right? So as a result, people that try to like, do the best as we can. And then typically that the household survey in many developing countries, they tend to have quite a bit of wealth information about expenditure and so forth in here, right? So as a result, from this household survey, they actually get the demand estimate to get this aggregate price elasticity at the heart of this study here. So pretty much, that there's seminar paper by Peter Timmer and Alderman back in 1979, actually that used expenditure divided by quantity as the prices in this kind of demand study here. Partly because that in a household survey, they do not actually explicitly ask you the price. What they ask you, they ask you, how much do you spend on this? What is the quantity of that one? And then people just use that the ratio expenditure divided by quantity as what we call as a unit value. This is what people use it as quantity. Quantity is
cigarette packet of cigarette. Weight or something.
Could be like how many cigarette, how many packet, or like we're talking about the rice, for example, how many kilogram of rice you buy, and then so forth in here. Yeah, so I think it's I think in the Susuna's data, they're actually asking like how many like cigarette stick that you buy. I'm going to talk more about that when I come into the data here. But the idea is that, that when we talk about this survey data, because people do not ask you about the explicit price, so people just use it as a proxy as for the price in here, what we call as a unit value. Okay. So Sorry that I probably throwing some equation, but because I'm economist, it's not really economics, it's not economics seminar without an equation here, but I will try to like make sure that's can be more digestible for you here, right? So typically that if we have the market price, we typically can estimate the elasticity by using this budget set as your left-hand side equation, and then we have this market price in here, right? So if you have a market price in your equation in here, which is quite a bit easier for us to like get this elasticity of demand, it's pretty much like that, that's come up some of like this equation in here, right? But the reality in here is that most of this household survey here is that we do not have information of this market price in here, right? So people are using as a proxy of the quantity expenditure over that quantity here. Okay. So what happened is that when you like try to get this elasticity estimate from the household survey data, it's actually going to like causing a big and then a largely ignored problem in here, right? So as I mentioned to you guys before, that most demand modeling on household survey data uses this budget set data. But the budget shares actually that vary with the quality, quantity, and price, right? This is just kind of lunchtime here. So let me just try to like give you some kind of specific example. When people are asking you about, how much do you spend on the beef expenditure? So even though that beef is quite specific in here, but within beef itself, there's quite a lot of variation along the beef, right? Are you going to buy the cheapest beef cut, like mince or like steak or filet mignon, right? So I was just coming from Japan. Everyone worried about this Wagyu beef is like king of the like beef in here, right? But after I've been in Japan for quite some time, also know within the Wagyu itself, there also a lot of that variation. You want to go with the Kobe beef, you like Tatsuka or like Matsusaka and so forth in here, right? So there's quite a lot of variation around here. So as a result, right? So when, for example, when the price of the like beef increase, right? So you can also like decrease the quantity of your beef that you buy. That is your quantity response. But at the same time as well, you can also like adjust for the quality here, right? So maybe that if the Kobe beef is too expensive, I can just like sliding down the quality, moving from a Kobe beef to maybe like chuck steak in here, right? And then so forth in here. So as a result in here is that most of the study that tend to like ignore this quality choice in here. So despite taking account of complication due to this addictive behavior, so that most of the study in the literature, when we like try to do the literature here, they tend to like ignore this quality implication in here, then implicitly assuming that that is a zero scope for the quality response. So as a result, that when we're talking about this taxing unhealthy item, it's going to be greatly overstated by the elasticity in the existing literature here. Okay. So let me just pretty much like give you some kind of like a history background behind here. So I think that the idea behind this in here is that back to the price on how to get insight in here. So typically that, as I mentioned to you before, right? So the household survey do not provide data on the expenditure on and the quantity consumed of specific good here. Contrary to the textbook demand model that probably we teach our Econ 101 student here, we just tell okay, when the price increase, you're going to expect that the demand to like decrease in here, right? But we're looking at the specific kind of like good in here, right? But reality in here, we're actually working with the real data when we're asking information from the household survey in here, is that we also like going to like get that not only quantity matters, quality also like going to like play around here. So this is the kind of like nice thing about the quotation from the person who took it here. An item of expenditure in a family budget schedule is to be regarded as the sum of the number of variety of the commodity, each of the different quality and sold at different price in here, right? So since that there are many different varieties, brands, package size within the commodity group, the consumer like faces to choose two choices in here, right? So what quantity to buy and then to consume, and then what quality, usually that typically as shown by the price per unit, to like buy and consume here. So to reiterate in here is that the demand study that do not allow for both of these choices is going to like overstate the quality responses to the price changes with the quantity response, so that making the elasticity that too large in here, too responsive in here, right? So this is pretty much quite a nice timeline to understanding this demand elasticity for the household survey. So pretty much, that back to the 1955, that the press who take they are one of the very few, raised the possibility of using this expenditure over the quantity as like proxy for the price. but they're actually noting that there is a risk of that bias because that the survey group are not well-defined specific groups. And then in the 1979, Timmer and Alderman, they are one of the very few papers that empirically they use this. Actually, they use that seasonal data, try to look at the estimating demand elasticity for rice in Indonesia. And then in the 1986 in here, that the Cox and Wagner method, pretty much, that they kind of treat this expenditure of a quantity of error and the quality variation. What they did in here, this kind of like they kind of like claim that they take into account the quality implication in here, but when you try to look at the econometric behind it, they actually try to estimate within one equation by including the information about household characteristic, the spatial information and temporal information and fixed effect, but that not really like taking care into this quality effect in here, right? But since then, a lot of like papers actually, when you try to look at this demand here, they're actually using this Cox and Wagner method here, okay? And then around that late 80s and early 90s, that the Sir Angus Deaton, they actually developed a method to like try to look at this quality and then the quantity response to that price changes when using this expenditure over the quantity as a proxy for the value. And then with this Sir Angus Deaton method in here, they actually assumption that basically they're based on the weak separability here. So the Angus Deaton also got very similar paper, and then one of these paper also like used at the estimating rice demand in econometrica on Indonesia as well, right? So and then there are quite a few of us, including myself and John. So we also have got quite a few like paper like published based on this Angus Deaton method here, correcting for this quality here, right? But then in the like in the mid 2000 in here, we actually found that some people that try to do it here actually found that some of these weak separability that posed by the Angus Deaton in here actually not made that separability assumption. I think that one of the famous example is from a Christopher like McAuliffe that tried to look at this kind of like separability assumption that did not really hold. And then that John also like did quite a few papers that show that that the Angus Deaton method is actually not holding here, right? So so as I mentioned to you before, right? So when you try to look at some of the Indonesian literature, when they try to look at this estimating the cigarette demand here, so they actually try to look at this your quantity of consumption of quantity buy here, and then this kind of expenditure for the quantity as a proxy for the price, partly because that none of when you look at using the Switzerland, for example, the Switzerland doesn't really asking you that what is actually the price in here, right? So as a result is that when you try to look at using kind of equation as a proxy for the demand in here, your estimated of the elasticity of demand is going to be larger in the magnitude when you have actually the proper rise using on the rise equation here, partly because you know that we have the measurement error, and then we also have less variation for space unit value in prices in here. I'm not going to go into the technical detail in here, but if anyone interested, I can talk about that after the talk here. Right. So another issue for this double law framework in here is that when you're asking people about how much do you buy, how much do you consume for these sin goods in here, you tend to have have a lot of this measurement error problem here, right? So single respondent, when you actually when we were asked about how much your household consuming here, so single respondent per household actually typically not fully informed about spending from walking around money by the co-resident here, right? And then John actually and the co-author did experiment in Tanzania with a tightly supervised individual diary versus the household diary, show that the soft drink category with the biggest error, especially in the urban area here, right? So as a result of this measurement error, when this measurement error pass into the equation, you are going to overestimate the impact of the elasticity of demand if you actually are not taking into account explicitly here. Okay. So now just going back to this specific example to the cigarette in Indonesia. So this is based on the information. So this is a cigarette in Indonesia. You got this G Samsung, that probably the premium one. So even though within the cigarette, very specific, right? You tend to see that we tend to have quite a lot of quality variation within this category here. So this is a price per stick for the G Samsung premium. It's about like 10 cents Australian dollar here, right? And then if you look at probably a bit 30% less, you can buy this Jarum black in here. For even like cheaper, you probably can like slide down to like buying this Gudang Garam Merah, which is kind of like cracked in here. And then even at cheapest, you can like buy this Bintang Warna filter here.
The price trends, which is more important for measuring elasticity.
Yeah.
Now, it is true that at a given point in time,
Yeah.
prices vary among cigarettes,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That's true.
Yeah.
But over the time, I think they would have moved together, the prices.
Yeah, so I think that time is going to like play important here. So in this case, because that we try to look at, because that we kind of facing by the, I mean, we're just going to use the cross-sectional data here, right? So I think,
Then how can we measure elasticity?
or what we try to do here, we can still like measure elasticity. I'm just going to like go back into the equation in the next few seconds. But just bear with me, and then if that is not quite satisfying answer, and then we can go into detail here.
And Susan, it's just creating, you're not looking at Rocco Woody, white cigarettes, are you?
So I think that in the IMLS, we also look at this rock booty as well.
You do.
Right, so I think that the point that I want to try to make in here, right? So there's quite a lot of variation with this within this price of a cigarette here, right? So you might want to say, like if price of this G Thompson become more dearer, that people can adjust that scaling with this around this different kind of like quality here. So even though that a lot of like papers, when they try to look in here, like people do not really explicitly looking at this, they might be like adjusting this different quality here. But some of the like papers actually are looking at this evidence from the UK smokers actually switching from a factory-made cigarette to the cheaper roll your own tobacco to like cope with the tax-induced rise prices in here. So there's papers by the Patos in here. And then we also like found the evidence from Taiwan, actually when the government actually imposed a 35% tax increases, there's evidence that people do like switching to the cheaper brands in here, right? But for the study in the Taiwan, they're actually asking at people for the 3 different kind of like brand here. So probably a bit harder like to try to make an excellent validity here. But at least, kind of a bit that's kind of telling you that the evidence do exist, that people that seems to be that choice seems to be matter for the people here. So this is how that where we contribute to this paper here. So what we do in this paper here is that we are going to estimate the individual level of demand for the cigarettes. So the data that we got access to, we have information about that individual consumption for like those at age of 15 and above in here. So from here is that we are going to examine how this estimated on price elasticity is going to be differ if we take into account the quality choice, and then if we ignore that quality choice in here, right? So the way that how we're going to do this quality choices is via the brand level effects. So the data that we got access to, they actually ask individual, what kind of typically the brand that you actually buy here. So we also use this result to simulate the impact due to increase in taxes, because in the last few years, especially before the COVID, when you look at this public health paper here, they try to say, okay, we want to take care of this public health issue here, right? So either like through the soda tax consumption or through the tobacco tax in here, right? So I think at least we try to look at what happens if we are going to look into account this estimating demand, and then if we take into account this quality effect, whether there's going to be overestimation or underestimation, or the tax is going to be doing that much more or less than what people have thought in here, right? Okay, so the way that how we control for this quality in here is that we are going to do this through the brand level effect. So as you see from the graph earlier that I showed you, they seem to become like the brand actually seem giving us the indication of the quality here, right? So before I jump into these cigarette topics in here, I only thought that cigarettes quite boring, right? There's not many variation in here, right? So this actually a picture I took that when I went back to Indonesia. So this is just a fraction of the self that I can try to sneakily took the picture here, right? So when I was in Japan earlier this year, so when I went to Don Kohite, can someone give me an estimation how many cigarette that you can choose from?
You want us to?
Yeah. What do you think, What is your rough ballpark figure?
50.
250.
Right.
Right, so I was not allowed to take a picture, so I was so tempted. I wanted to take a picture to show you guys, but then I got caught by one of the storekeepers. So, okay, right. So I think this is also Indonesia case as well, right? So there's a lot of if for this reason here, right? Now, if quality matters, brand kind of telling the same thing as well. If we do not take that into account, that whatever the estimated we saw, that might be actually overly estimated the problem here, right? So in this case, that we actually using this brand effect as a proxy for the quality here. So you might want to ask, that why focus on Indonesia? So smoking prevalence among the adult is very high in Indonesia. So this is just kind of give you some kind of global picture in here. So there's based on the data from the World Bank in here. So according of this information, so the darker the color, the red kind of means that the larger the proportion of the people actually smoke. So according to this data, about like 38% of people actually smoke in Indonesia. And then if you look at this BPS data, they tend to give a bit lower, about like 28%. But regardless, it's still quite a high figure here, right? About out of this 57 million smokers in Indonesia, 67% of this actually male population here, and then there are quite a few of female population, but that's quite low here, right? So average age of smoking initiation is 17 years old. That's according to the study that done by the World Bank. But there are quite a few exceptions. Oh, this is just telling you that according to the latest report by the WHO, the global consumption of cigarette tend to be declining, but the reverse pattern actually happened in Indonesia. And some of you probably remember this cigarette baby. As mentioned to you before, that when the World Bank found that the people on average tend to start smoking at around 17 years old, but there are quite a few exceptions that this baby that went viral, they actually that 2-year-old boy, they actually started smoking here, right? But luckily, a few years gone by, I think people try to change this behavior and then so forth in here. Apart from this, in addition to cigarette or rokok putih, Indonesia smokers use kretek. So for the audience who are not familiar with the kretek, so this kretek is kind of like making from the 1/3 of the cloth, and then about 2/3 of that tobacco, and then plus other thing as well here, right? So idea is that called a kretek is partly because that you got this cloth. When you try to burn your cigarette, they tend to causing this sound that track called that the kretek here, all right? So if I do not really explain that very well, so I would suggest you guys to highly watch the Gadis kretek. So this is Gadis kretek, even though there kind of be a romance about the two main character here. But you get to see that the history of the kretek industry in Indonesia, and then also to see how the kretek were made and so forth in here, right? So this is Indonesian Study Group Seminar. I think that's probably my platform to also promote Indonesian culture as well, right? So these are highly recommended to watch.
It's got a New Zealand connection, right?
Yes, so the male lead actor, the Aryo Bayu, is actually a good friend of us. So so he spent his teenage year in New Zealand. So yeah. Right. And smoking is also the third highest risk factor for the disease burden in Indonesia. And then what troubling in here is that is a large high household expenditure on tobacco could also have a serious welfare implication here. So you probably tend to think that tobacco is quite expensive. People tend to maybe use that tobacco money for something else in here, right? But in Indonesia, it's actually that tobacco consumption is the second largest expenditure among the poor after the rice. Right? So you kind of think about this, right? If we know that this smoking is going to be not really good for your health. So if you're the parent, you probably divert that resources using that tobacco expenditure, maybe to put into more productive investment, like in education and then so forth in here, right? But this actually is not the case for Indonesia. And then apart from that is that Indonesia is among the few countries that hasn't really signed the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So kind of that's why I see that the tobacco industry is still booming in Indonesia, and then because that's hardly regulation. Yes.
Susan, do you think that figure is plausible, that second largest expenditure among the four after rice? That seems extraordinary.
That's going to be extraordinary. I'm not too sure, right? That's, yeah, when I try to look at, that's quite a bit of policy, but when I try to look at quite a few papers actually,
Yeah, just curious.
And if smoking is the third highest risk factor for disease burden, what are the two that are higher than smoking?
tuberculosis and then obesity seems to be but I need to double check
That
here.
doesn't make sense to me. If it's a higher risk factor, it seems like what behaviors are conducive to disease burden. But we can't say that tuberculosis, because that is a disease. What does this thing mean? I assume that there are things that people consume that lead to a high disease burden. Smoking, I can
Smoking is
understand.
one of that one, yeah.
I would have thought it was the top. So what are the other things that people consume that are more dangerous to their health than smoking?
I probably did double check. So could be I think that one of I think the recent paper I tried to look at people tend to like look at this kind of this junk food consumption.
Diabetes is second.
Diabetes second. Okay.
Diabetes.
Yeah, thank you.
Or is it really, it's the third highest cause of death, maybe?
From prescription.
Yeah, I need to double check about that. But yeah, thank you for that one. Yeah. Yeah.
But diabetes, again, it's not something that you consume, it's disease itself.
Yeah.
It can't be a contributor to disease burden in any meaningful sense.
Yeah, so I will double check as well. So I think that's actually I got that scrap from the WHO report here.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and then I probably is going to like double check again. I mean, yeah, I think that this is the second largest expenditure amongst the like, the rice is quite a bit of boring here. Yes.
If you ask a lot of people, actually, they say, I'd rather not eat than not smoke. That's very common, actually, among people that. So, in that respect, you can believe that it's actually.
And so you're quite sure that the 2/3 of the adult male population are smokers. I'm not surprised it's that high.
That's what the data. So yeah.
70% adult male.
2/3, yeah? I'm really surprised. I thought it had been decreasing.
Yeah. Right. So I think probably we'll see this quite a bit.
Well, I think if I may add, I heard there was a study from Professor Arif Ansar Yusuf. So the smokers tend to buy rice a lot more than protein. So it's indirectly maybe cause the diabetic being the second disease in Indonesia. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I will do more of that homework. Yeah. So a lot of the Indonesian consume the kretek here, right? So some of people think that kretek is probably a bit safer, but from the public health perspective, so people actually say that when you're like smoking this kretek is actually much more, dangerous than the rokok putih here, because I think that kretek they contain double the like tar, nicotine, and carbon CO2 here. So as a result, that typically people say that because that kretek got these spices in here, it's going to be fine, but there are quite a few health associated that's going to be dangerous by smoking this kretek here.
Is that saying that kretek is more risky to health?
Than the rokok putih, yeah.
Why is that?
Because that by default, the kretek actually contain like twice the level of tar, nicotine level.
It's partly also, isn't it, because they tend not to have a, what do you call it?
Filter, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that could be as well. Yeah.
But we need Chris Manning here. He can talk firsthand.
Yeah, I probably is going to like have a chat with Mark Chris later on. Right. So in addition to all the effect I presented to you here, is that the tobacco policy in Indonesia is actually not really helping us to like reducing this tobacco consumption. Even though that since the late 90s, the government of Indonesia continues to reform the tobacco excise tax system, So aiming to hopefully reduce the smoking prevalences, you're going to like increase the tax revenue, going to like reduce the cost of like smoking on the healthcare costs in here, right? But look at this tobacco tax structure in Indonesia. It is probably like one of the very complicated system in Indonesia. Not only that your tax is going to depending on the type of cigarette, it's going to depending on your production scale, and then also going to depending on the retail price range you are going to like charge, and then that's how that the government is going to decide what is excise tariffs looks like here, right? So the tariff actually looks like, from I don't know how many that tier, from 2009, they like slowly like try to reduce it from the 19 to about the 8 tiers in here, right? So even though it's not really like make things a bit much more complicated here, as the result you see, right? So as a consumer, you probably can try to adjust the quality here, but giving this complication of the tax system in here, maybe that the producer, they can also like try to like play the game around, try to like maybe change the production scale and then doing to be in the like cheaper range or like vice versa here, right? So as a result, that this complication is actually making it a bit more believable story that the quality adjustment is going to be much likely to happen in Indonesia case in here. Okay. So this is I can just try to look at this average percentage of excess tax to retail price. So as I mentioned to you before, according to the WHO recommended that we should be at least at 75% of the consumer price in here. But Indonesia, even though that there has been quite a bit of improvement, but still like far below that the recommended of like 75% here. Okay. So this, in addition to that, and then cigarette is also very affordable in Indonesia. So this is just taken from the Numbeo here, is that if you want to buy a pack of like Marlboro, Australia and New Zealand, pretty much the most expensive place to get your pack of cigarettes. A lot of my friends on Instagram, they posted that they are shopping in Japan because at Japan, where yen is weakened. So even though that Japan is considered cheap, but it's very much cheaper to get your cigarette in Indonesia, 2.28. So the cost of like cigarette in Indonesia, for the price of like one cigarette in Australia, you can get a pack of like Marlboro in Indonesia, right? So as a result, you can tend to like see that the actually that make things actually worse in here, right? So maybe that the reason that why cigarette is quite cheap in Indonesia, and then as a result that we probably do not really see that people reducing the tobacco consumption. Okay.
But like, I guess if we try to compare in the world price, maybe because most of the country doesn't have like giant industries like Indonesia, so that doesn't really affecting labor. I mean, like if we want to like increase the price, so then it will affect the labor. But like country who doesn't have this cigarette industry, then maybe that will be easier to just increasing the price because it won't affecting like.
Yeah. That could be also the supply story as well, because Indonesia is one of the tobacco largest producer as well. And then a lot of this pressure, even though I think probably like the government that they want to try to increase the tax, but because that people like kind of like think that this tobacco industry actually creating a lot of employment to the industry, and then probably that's what can be that's hesitant at trying to increase the tobacco tax in Indonesia. Yeah, again, we feel like the kind of tobacco supply and then demand kind of side story here as well, right? But I think in Australia case that they are quite a bit brave, right? So I think that they actually they have this plain packaging, right? I think that's why like when New Zealand like see the big brother like do win the lawsuit, right? So I think New Zealand like follow the step as well, right? I think so that might be the case as well. Yeah. Okay. So now, moving on to the data here. So data that we use in this paper actually coming from the Indonesia Family Life Survey. So I don't really need to like talk into detail about this ILS. This is pretty much the longitudinal survey. So we have a cover that wave of 1 to like 5. And then, so the nice thing about Indonesia Family Life Survey, even though there's a longitudinal survey here, it's actually got this very low attrition rate. So typically, the like 90% of the original target household will re-interview in the wave 5 in here, right? So the sample had grown from about 7,000 household to about 14,000 household by the wave 5. So the good thing with this IFLS in here is that in addition to household characteristic, they also collect individual demand for the tobacco product. So this where we actually exploit this data-rich setting in here, try to like look at this, estimating the cigarette demand here, right? So in the individual demand tobacco product module in here, they actually ask the respondent what type of tobacco, whether you smoke like crack cigarette, whether you smoke the pipe, how many cigarettes they smoke. They got the asking about the price, the brand, and then the quantity of cigarette purchased over the last week in here. And then the nice thing about this IFLS, they also like collect the market prices through the community. So some of you might be very familiar using this IFLS. So in addition to the household individual module, they also have this community module as well. And then they're asking a price from 3 different survey informants. One is through the Kepala RT, one is through this Ibu PKK, and then the other one, they're actually doing this warung survey project here. So we explore this information here. So for the purpose of this paper, and then I think that Prema did mention when you try to look at this elasticity of demand, you probably want to look at the time series in here, right? But because we have kind of this household survey data, and then I think that the earlier wave that did not really ask about the comprehensive. So with this data restriction, we just treat this as a cross section for our analysis. But I think that it's not going to be reduce the purpose here, because we want to try to look at, assuming that this is the data you got, what happened if you estimated your elasticity, ignoring the quality, and then when you take into account, how is it going to differ here? Okay. But of course, that when IFLS 6 is going to be made available, I'm going to use that as well and try to look at what the impact in there.
The longitudinal rate, the survey, it has covered different years, so it just
It's covered different years.
how many?
So 1993 survey from probably average 5 or 6 years. Yeah. Yes. 2 minutes of push. Okay. So this kind of this statistic here from our data here, right? So as you can see from this table in here, people actually spend about almost 80 cigarette purchases per week, and then about 77 cigarettes smoked per week. And then in our sample, people have been smoking for about 19 years already. And then we also want to look at, that what is actually the quantity smoked by other household member on a weekly basis, about 40 here. That is quite a striking high number. And then what are the typical common brand of cigarette purchase in here? People actually know Gudang Garam Surya is probably the most commonly purchased brand, followed by the Jarum Super, Sampurna Ema, Jarum Kretek, 76 here. So this is our empirical model in here. So our empirical model is quite simple, and partly because we have information on the price and then the quantity here, right? So this our model, we're using a double log model. So this QI is a quantity consumed or purchased by individual, because the survey asked these two information. We have the information on the price. The XI here is an income, and then we also included a bunch of the household characteristic. And then this B subscribe H is the brand effect, is where we use it as the proxy for the quality here. So this is our result. So when you try to look at this quantity purchase in here, the model here is that we actually estimating that the one without the brand effect, and then one is with the brand effect here, right? So what you saw that when we forgot to take into account the brand effect, the elasticity is about minus 0.82. What it is saying here, if we increase the price by 10%, it's going to reduce your demand by about 8.2%. But when we take into account the brand effect, the effect is probably not as big. So actually moving from 0.82 to about minus 0.54 here. Okay. So again, when we try to look at this quantity consumed here, the pattern is still about the same. About we tend to see that if you do not take into account the brand, you tend to be overestimated the impact of the price elasticity here. Just for the sanity check, we also try to conduct this F test, and then we try to look at whether they are the same. They seem to be kind of statistically significantly different, kind of telling you that quality effect actually playing a role here. But when you try to look at this income effect here, so income effect doesn't matter whether you control for the brand or not, they seem to be like stabilized over these two specification here. So kind of telling you, right? So people do adjust for quantity, but also like adjust for the quality when we increase the price here.
Now the price here is the unit value per cigarette.
It's not the unit value, it's actually the actual price.
Actual price, the retail price we showed earlier.
Yeah, so the price that the people ask from the community survey. Yeah, so that's the unique thing here. We don't have to like deal with this expenditure over quantity, adjust it for different methodology because that we got the price. Let me just quickly go to here, right? So we just use that information, try to like stimulate this, what happened if you're going to increase that pricing here, right? So we try to look at kind of different kind of adjustment, 10% increase, 22% increase, 63% is that where that we need to like bring to the WHO here, right? So we look into account this no quality adjustment and then the quality adjustment. So if we do not take into the quality adjustment, say for example here, right? So you're going to like decrease consumption by about 15.1%. But when we put into account the quality adjustment, it's still going to be some reduction, but the reduction is not as big as what we would have like assumed before. Okay, and then there's also like kind of a bit of concern. If you're going to increase your tax, you're probably going to reduce the revenue here, right? But in fact, that if you actually take into account the this quality effect, the revenue is actually increased a bit more than when we ignore that the brand effect here. So in other words, that the takeaway from this story here is that we kind of like show that the quality kind of like matters. A lot of these price elasticity or demand estimated tend to that conflict quality responses and then the quantity responses in here. And as a result, whether the price is right or not, there's a doubt for that one here, right? And then what we do here is that we control for within item quality changes as the price changes using the brand level control. So the on price elasticity of demand for cigarette purchase is 0.82, but it's going to be less smaller once we actually introduce this brand effect in here, right? So as a result, that the tax high in reduced cigarette consumption is going to be overstated if we actually ignore this quality. Right. So this is kind of like a conclusion here. So I'm just try to like borrow this quote from a McKinsey here, right? So suppose that the government discovered that cigarettes are sensitive to like price changes and imposes a tax on cigarette in order to decrease consumption and reduce the cancer rate. It is possible, however, that cigarette expenditure are sensitive to price, not because individuals respond on the like quantity margin, but because they respond on the like quality margin. So if this is the case, the tax increase will not cause individuals to consume fewer cigarettes, but simply to consume the lower quality cigarette. So while there may still be an impact on public health, this will not be due to a decrease in consumption, but will instead depend on whether the low quality cigarettes are more or less carcinogenic than the high quality cigarette, right? So that's kind of a bit hoping that takeaway message are important of like this quality and quantity and margin. A lot of people like kind of like wrongly like take to the quality effect as the quantity margin. So that might be as a result, might be overestimate here, right? Because even though that I show you the example from the cigarette here, but the same case as well, like people talking about this reducing this obesity by introducing soda tax in here, right? So even though within the soda tax, you also tend to like see a lot of variation within the per unit price, right? So people kind of adjust the scale, right? So by buying the premium like Coca-Cola Zero to maybe like home brand soda product here. So yeah, so I think that I'm out of time. So let me just stop here.
Thank you very much, Susan, for a very interesting and very dense, insightful presentation. Now I invite questions or comments from the floor.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Really calling the first one.
Thank you, Susan, for the very interesting presentation. I think it is travel proposed by regional stakeholders. So the main thing is that, of course, it doesn't seem that you take into account of the influence of advertising. So the battle on the ground for all these companies are advertisement.
Yep.
And there could be two effects of advertisement. One is that advertisement, if you put a poster, since 2010, there is a law that requires all cigarette poster to mention that cigarette get cancer.
Okay.
Yeah, cigarette cause cancer.
Yeah.
It is, I think the law started 2000.
That's what-
But promotion of an activity, so for example, Gudang Garam promote a band, that one, yes, when Gudang Garam put Gudang Garam, they need to have those, but the fact of doing those sponsoring a concert
Yeah.
do not have those notions. So the singer doesn't have to say, okay, we got supported by Gudang Garam and Gudang Garam cause cancer. No, that doesn't have to say that. So there are two things. And one of the biggest, one of the biggest cost spending for this company is promotion, because the fight on the ground is so deep. Now, so the effect of, and then you could see why those tax are so varied a lot. One of the reasons is that the company has power to
That's true.
basically, negotiate on the tax.
Yep.
Even we assume the tax is excluded, I'm not directly convinced that the company will pass over the price to the consumer, because the cost of their advertisement
Yep.
is so big. So they might, at a certain level, reduce the cost of advertising, as long as everybody got it.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. But if it is only Gudang Garam got it, then that's a bit different.
Okay.
So so the second issue is that how you could take in account the cost of advertisement. And third is that would it be better to actually have different tax for different quality?
That's actually a good suggestion. So I think that in our model, I think that we did include the fixed effect budgets, regional fixed effect budgets that did not report in here, right? But I think that the advertisement and promotion, that's kind of a dilemma here, right? So, even though that a company like government that try to educate people, it's not really a good idea to smoke is smoking cancer here, but you tend to see all these big company, they tend to do good at the same time as well, like sponsoring education, promoting the ban in here, right? So I think with the tax simulation, we probably have to try to find a bit better way that try to look at how to incorporate. I'm not really sure whether we can try to look at using this a different tax for kind of this a different brand. So if any in the audience that know how to get that data, that'd be useful as well. But thank you. I will think about how to integrate that. Yes.
Maybe I haven't understood the whole story clearly, but it is not quite clear to me. How can you make tax inferences based on an elasticity coefficient estimated using household survey data? Because every brand of cigarette in the country are sold out of the country, right? The same prices. I mean, for a given brand, a consumer in a particular household will be paying the same price. Yeah. Now, in this case, the dramatic variation in prices across household can be for different factors, not something related to the tax policy, right? Therefore, I think making inferences at the national level, I mean, the government implement tax at the national level from household elasticity coefficient. I think they are contradictory things, right?
Yeah, so that's going to be the complication because we actually using.
But I think your paper has so many other information, right? About the living standard difference. I mean, these things, the way to sell your paper. If you just highlight only the elasticity thing, I think it is a little bit problematic. I think that's my feeling.
Yeah, so I think we probably try to need to pay the more attention how to like do the kind of this tax
Yeah.
kind of more carefully. So I kind of, I got your
Yeah.
point, right? So I think
Yeah.
when we talk about this
If the
tax,
taxation is not at the household differences, right, at the national level.
yeah, so the tax come out by the company, and then like Pak Budi mentioned, right, this company might just like play around, have call this a recipe power monopoly, yeah. So I guess it actually making our life a bit more complicated, but yeah, but that's, you know, that's good to get. Ends.
If you could speak a little louder. so the people on the
My
mic
first question is, how do you take into account the different tobacco products? For example, e-cigarettes and what if they switch from tobacco to different kind of tobacco products? And second, since you have study on the quality of a cigarette itself, and are you able to make a simulation based on the quality of cigarette itself, like whether if people have less variety of cigarettes, they tend to smoke less or how? And lastly, I wonder why you shouldn't use the longitudinal data of the level.
Okay, so I think that one of that back to the last question first, we do not use a long meter data. I think that, you know, probably that the detailed information about this consumption of tobacco actually only like available like in the last like probably like wave 4 or wave 5 of the like data. So that's why that we chose like to work with the like latest one. And then in terms of this switching of these tobacco products, so like e-vape or whatever, I think that back in 2014, the vaping is probably that not being that popular here. So I think that in the data is pretty much, you know, asking about people, you know, what kind of like typical cigarette credit that you buy. And then in the data itself, they actually know that this information actually condition that they are kind of being the habitual like, smoker here. And then we do know whether they actually are smoking this crack or white cigarette, basically like, through the like brand that they buy. Yeah. Yeah, but I think so. I see the point is really quite interested trying to look at kind of this is then like change the pattern and so forth here, right? Yeah, next.
Thank you, Susan. Your presentation is interesting. I think I have comments and questions. I think the biggest literature gap in Indonesia's tobacco research is again the elasticities, cross elasticities between tier and also brand. Because we know there is downward substitutions when like right now they have 8 tiers of cigarettes. When government mentioned they increase tax, they mentioned the average increase in the excise. But if you look at by tiers, the increase is lower as you go down to the lower tiers. And we don't know the elasticity, how consumer substitutes from the highest tier to the lower tiers, partly because of the data. If we use a SUSLAS, we can only differentiate 2 cigarettes, putting white cigarettes and crackers, and also others. So I did like using different methods to estimate the cross elasticity between white, crack and others. But that's all. We cannot go beyond. I think your research is interesting to look at how we control for brand level. And you mentioned the data. I think if you have access and if people can have access, the dirjen bea cukai that have those data by brand level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is exactly my point.
Sure.
You need a time series comparison. Because household comparison cannot make those inferences.
Yeah, I think the last, I think, proper research that document those how tax pass through by brand level, we use data back in 2010.
Okay.
If you can look at the recent data, it will be good. So,
okay.
Yeah. And my question would be, how your estimation compares with the Deaton method? Because the last method that I aware is Deaton, they use unit value, they account for measurement error and etc. And how your estimation compares to.
So in this paper that we did not really kind of like playing around with this Deaton method at all. So we just because that Deaton method is quite complicated to begin with, right? And then one of that is Deaton method also assuming that that is a variation across the class that everyone is going to see this week's probability here. So when we try to look at this Deaton method assuming that your unit value tend to be have a less variation here, right? So when we try to look at this ratio of the cheapest to the most expensive credit from our data here, we tend to see that that's quite a lot of spatial variation across our data here. So basically that is called as the Archean alert effect. So pretty much kind of shipping the good apples out theory. So you can think about this in here, right? So why Australia, we tend to consume more of the Californian wine compared to typical the American people. And then probably partly because that when you ship that the good wine or bad wine, if you try incorporating the shipping cost itself, probably the difference between the good and then the bad quality wine is probably not that great anyway, right? So this is the reason that why we do not use the Deaton method. I think if you're using the Deaton method, you probably want to refer this paper by the Christopher McKelvey, and then the John Gibson also done quite a few papers try to look at that even though that the Deaton method was correct at that time, but there seems to be that the assumption that that unit value that does not vary across especially here is going to be violating that here. Yeah, but thank you so much. I think that if are we going to try to get into information from that they have to try to look at this different kind of text from this different brand that we use for. Yeah, again, the price, access to the data, right? So we need to get the good data. I don't know, maybe that after this you actually give me some kind of suggestion. Maybe you can write kind of proposal together, collect our own data, maybe tracking the people over the time, and then talk to this different company, and then yeah.
Susan, thanks. Really interesting presentation. Just a small comment. You had a mention of the impact on the revenue towards the end of your last slide.
Yeah.
That's government revenue, right?
Yeah, and then again, with this government revenue, we're just assuming that they are not passing it to the consumer.
Sure. So the bottom line on the government revenue story is the government's going to lose some revenue, but not much, depending on which model in a way.
Yeah.
So, of course, the obvious point to make is they might lose a bit on excise, but they're going to gain a lot on public health expenditure, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I think there are estimates out there. You could even run an estimate just to give orders of magnitude, I'm guessing, of your revenue loss, that is less excise, to the much larger, I'm guessing, revenue gain from the hospital savings.
Yeah, that'd be a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are 3 questions online. There are 35 participants online. So the 2 questions are very related. One from Anonymous and one from Elizabeth Kramer. They're talking about illegal tobacco.
Yep.
One of the implications of the excessive rise in tobacco excise is the effect for consumers to switch to illegal cigarettes instead of stop smoking completely. This behavior also disadvantages the government as they lost excise revenue. How would you take on this with this dilemma? How is the issue ideally be approached? And the second question comes from Ahmad Zulfikar. I will summarize it. What if the tax were drastically increased instead? In his opinion, that would be more effective than the current policy in reducing tobacco consumption significantly. And then the challenge, however, lies in how to determine the appropriate tobacco tariff for this strategy.
That's a very interesting question. I think with regard to this illegal kind of thing, right? So when I think Carl and myself, we were at the workshop by this Timor-Leste governor, right? is, when the government, like Timor-Leste government tried to reduce this tobacco consumption by increasing the tax, and then the result that there's a lot of this illegal kind of like trade, people like actually smuggling from Indonesia to like Timor-Leste.
On the streets of Dili everywhere.
On the street, Dili everywhere.
First-hand report from last week.
Right? So I think that with regard to Indonesia, I think that because Indonesia, I think as you see that before that, I think that the majority of Indonesia actually they smoke kretek, and then probably illegal point of view, probably like Indonesia probably is the only like country that actually produce a kretek, but correct if I'm wrong here, right? So I think probably the illegal story here, I'm not really maybe not really a big kind of concern because like kretek is specific to Indonesia. And then with the like tax increasing it drastically, and then as from my research kind of showing it here, right? So if you want to try to like reduce this consumption, it's true that like people I think that like by increasing 10%, is actually you need to like beyond that 10% if going to like reduce drastically for that tax in here, right? But at the same time as well, that's quite a bit again that dilemma, right? So this company, they actually one of the like big tax revenue contributor to the government. And then there might be some kind of political economy involved in here, right? So yeah, so I'm not really sure that I have the answer to that question, but that is an important question. It's quite challenging. So maybe I need to put some kind of political economy like modeling spawn into it. Yeah. Yeah.
Regarding the illegal kretek, I think the concern is in the illegal kretek in rural areas. For example, like there is the legal cigarette called black, but there is illegal cigarette called blank. So there is this kind of
Really?
yeah, there is a lot of them in the rural areas, and
Just like buying
every brand they have their own illegal brand.
I learned something new. So I didn't know. I only like thought, like when you buy this branded handbag like Hermes or Louis Vuitton, when you like go to other countries that you tend to see the
For example, for that G Samsu, there is G Roll, something like that.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay.
So maybe you're not a smoker.
As you can tell, I'm not a smoker, right? So I think that probably my field experience is not that. But that's a thank you for pointing that out also. Yeah.
Susan, have you also taking account the fact that cigarette is part of the commodity to define poverty line?
Yes.
When you increase the price of cigarette, the poverty line will increase.
Yeah.
And as you know, very sensitive. So yeah, stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a bit, I mean, this kind of topic is going to be like raise a lot of eyebrows in here, but I think it's quite important point of view. And then probably I think that the starting point for John and myself, we try to look at this in here, that because we quite a bit frustrated, right? When you like try to look at a lot of these public health advocate, they say now are going to like do this, but when they try to look at this kind of modeling, people that do not really do the modeling correctly. So even though, as you kind of saw mentioned before, right, I think we think the Angus Dealer method probably is the best way to go. And then, but not many people actually like using the Angus Dealer method. A lot of people are using Cox and Waldman method. And then, even though that the Angus Dealer method that was correct at that time, and then, a lot of kind of things happening around some kind of assumption that imposed by the modeling, that's not quite correct. So, yeah, so I think we kind of try to look at here because, maybe that all partly our fault as well as we economists that tend to like see that this estimating demand system is quite a bit like old-fashioned like textbook story here, right? So it doesn't matter when you like your econs 101 up to your PhD level, we will like drill with this boring demand model, and then probably they kind of lose appetite here, right? But we just want to kind of bring this kind of attention here, right? So even though that the demand model is quite boring for some people, but as I get to like teach this micro master level student, we also like drill them with this demand, try to dim empirical. I thought, oh, it's actually quite interesting kind of demand modeling here, right? So in effect, like when you're talking about this elasticity, everything here, how to like get the correct estimation framework, how to get the correct estimation for the policy implication is actually going to like play a big role here. So I think the idea for us is like, the price is right or not right. So yeah.
Susan, what do your numbers look like compared to other country studies?
So
Is Indonesia in the range or an outlier?
So I think that for
Perception, a lot of people are really addicted to credit.
yeah, so I think that our estimation for Indonesia, I think for the Indonesian usually range from between about like -0.2 to about -0.8. So I think the -0.2, I think that the one of the paper that they use kind of this assumes was like time series data.
Yeah.
So when you have a time series data I mentioned before, you probably like tend to like get a bit better estimation here, right? So a lot of this cross-sectional study here, even though that they try to look at this kind of this myopic behavior, they tend to be in the range of like -0.8. It's quite high.
Maybe worth mentioning that just to.
Yeah, so I think that we did mention it in the paper, but not that. But I will do that for the next iteration of my talk here. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Additional question from Elizabeth Kramer. She is talking about, what about the DIY cigarettes, like, rokok linting? Have you incorporated that into your research too?
Okay, so the IFLS, because in this case that we actually using the brand as our proxy for the quality here, right? So even though that in IFLS they're asking about that roll your own rokok linting, we can exclude that. So in the IFLS, only a small portion of people that use that. Yeah. Oh, looks like I probably need to like have a chat with Elizabeth Kramer. I heard of her name before, and then she has done quite a few cigarettes. So yeah, so thank you, Elizabeth. So I probably is going to reach out to you and seeking more advice on this front.
Questions from the floor? Okay, then I have one small question, based on my very, unknowledgeable in this stuff. You mentioned that the excise, the tax, affects the quality. I mean, the demand for more quality, for less quality cigarettes, right? And assuming that, so the impact on people, of different households, so that means that the poor households are more impacted in that sense. And that means if poor quality means more carcinogenic, then the impact is more on poor households, if that's the assumption. So
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe then next step here, I probably is going to look at this by the decile of the expenditure, try to look at what happened. Yeah, that's good.
Is that the case? The lower quality are more carcinogenic? That's quite an important point, actually.
Is that, I mean, that's my assumption, yeah? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, I think that's the assumption, right? So
it's less cost.
Yeah.
Less cost.
Yeah.
I mean, could be taste or, but that's probably.
Yeah.
But that's something that,
yeah,
very
so,
important, because then the poorest people will be impacted the most from the.
Yeah. yeah, so thank you for pointing that. So I will look into that. But yeah.
Okay, so we are, thank you very much, Susan. So I think it was very interesting and insightful presentation for.
Thank you.